Greetings, viewers. Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here. I don't hear the ding anymore because I have got my system set up differently because I'm having better sound and picture. And because of that, I probably should have my headphones on to tell me when stuff happens. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I need to go over some of the basics of the show. First of all, the show runs for approximately a half hour, sometimes, well, often more than that. I try to get to as many automotive questions as I can, keyword being automotive. I'm going to stick to automotive questions this time, but I'm going to throw this out there now. If you want, I can do an AMA, which is an Ask Me Anything episode. Up to this point, I've done 63 shows, and in each one of those, I've addressed automotive questions. However, sometimes there's other questions that end up in the feed. So if you have an interest in me answering other stuff besides automotive questions, perhaps we'll dedicate a show to that. Based on the feedback I get in the comments of this video on YouTube, we'll go from there. Anyway, as far as YouTube is concerned, I cannot see those comments or questions that are posted to the YouTube video. Therefore, I will not be answering them. You know, it kind of goes without saying. I will be taking the questions from the Google Plus event, and once the event is closed, once I shut the broadcast down, I won't be taking any more questions until the next show, which I always forget to look at the date, but it'll be 2 weeks from today. Sometime in April. I will announce it on the day of. It's, you know, every other Wednesday that I do these shows. However, EricTheCarGuy.com is always available to you. I will put links in the descriptions, not only to EricTheCarGuy.com, but many of the topics that I get asked about on this show and in general. I've written articles that include videos, photographs, all that kind of stuff, all the stuff that I could cram in there to help you with these automotive issues, since I've been doing this a while and I've been asked a lot of questions. But now we're doing the live thing. Oh, one more thing. Sometimes I mess up people's names. It's just kind of how it works, and I apologize. I'm somewhat dyslexic and I can't spell, so I can fix cars and answer your questions. How about that? Anyhow, let's get started here. And I usually start at the bottom, work my way up. We get towards the end of the show, and then I just go all random on it. Anyway, Sharivan Runu, I hope I said that correctly. Hey, Eric, I have an 04 Lancer 1.6 liter with a 5-speed manual transmission. It says to use API GL3 75W80 or GL4 75W85 or 75W90. I can't seem to find any of these. Can I use GL4 80W90? Also, can I use it if it says GL5? What interval do you recommend for manual fluid to be changed and the fluid level to be checked periodically? Signs of low fluid level. Thanks. It's a lot of questions there. I believe you can use GL5. However, viscosity is important, and what you're asking about 80W90 is slightly off from the 75W80. You know what I would do, just to err on the side of caution? I'd call the dealer and see what they use. If you're having difficulty finding that oil, chances are they are too. And if that's the case, they may tell you that they use the 80W90. And that's what I would do. I would just default to them because they have a service department. They use something. They may use the factory stuff, or they may purchase something in bulk, which is more likely because it's expensive for them to buy the stuff too. But that's who I'd consult with, honestly, just to be sure. I don't want to lead you astray and have you have transmission problems, because the W number is winter. So that is the cold flow rating. I'm probably not saying that correctly, but I will post a link in the description to a video I did with some engineers that make this stuff. The oil engineers at Valvoline were kind enough to sit down with me and talk about this very thing. And they said, you know, stick to the owner's manual, stick to the service manual, blah, blah, blah. However, like I said, I would default to, you know, whatever the dealer has to say on that. Moving on, James Moody. Hi, Eric. I have a 2007 Vectra GM product, can be Opel, Vauxhall, Holden, or Chevrolet, badged in different markets. Engine is a Z18XER. It's got a slight but annoying misfire while warming up. It's fine when cold, fine when hot. The problem only shows up when the engine is warming up. Plugs haven't changed, but this has made no difference. Recently, it gave me a code P0301, misfire detected, cylinder number 1. The code hasn't stuck around, though. It appears to have cleared itself. Where should I look next? An internet search suggests coil pack might be the next likely culprit. It's quite possible. It could be one of three things, actually. It could be a problem with spark delivery, which could suggest the coil pack that you're talking about. However, I'm not sure if GM was still using the dual coil setup with waste spark system on that engine or not, in which case they only have 2 coils, which fires 2 cylinders simultaneously. or one coil that fires 2 cylinders simultaneously. I'm not sure if they were still using it on that product or not, but that's something they did. So that would indicate that if you had a misfire in one cylinder and it was a coil pack problem, you would likely have misfires on 2 cylinders, that being the sister cylinders. Anyway, um, the other thing it could be is fuel delivery issue, or it could be a mechanical problem within that cylinder. The way I find misfires is to do what's called a leak down test, or not a leak down test. I'm getting ahead of myself. The way I try to find misfires is through doing a power balance test. And what you do with a power balance test, I'll also put a link in the description to a video I did about this, is you disable cylinders one by one and look for an RPM drop. If there is no RPM drop, it indicates that that cylinder is not contributing. An engine needs to be balanced. Each cylinder needs to be putting out an equal amount of power. I default to the scene in Casino where Robert De Niro is talking about the amount of blueberries in one muffin as compared to another muffin, and he didn't like the fact that one had a lot and one didn't have any, and he sat there and said an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin. Well, each cylinder has to produce an equal amount of blueberries, and if it doesn't, and it's got 1 or 2 less, then it's going to be out of balance. Hence, you get misfire situations. And as I said, those 3 things can contribute to those misfires, being problem mechanically, or problem with the spark production, or the fuel delivery to that cylinder. And fuel delivery also can go along with vacuum leaks. Sometimes an intake runner going to a particular cylinder can have a vacuum leak. So that's something else you check for. But you first start by nailing down the cylinder. So while the misfire is happening, run the engine. And you can do this one of 2 ways. The safest way is to disconnect the actual coil packs themselves. So if you do have individual coil packs for each cylinder and you are able to access them, you can very easily just unplug the connector to that coil pack, check for that RPM drop that I mentioned. If there is no RPM drop, that's your problem cylinder. If there is an RPM drop, that means that cylinder is contributing. You just put the engine out of balance because you disabled that cylinder. Another way to do it is to disconnect fuel injectors one at a time. And you do this per cylinder, looking for that problem cylinder. Once you've found it, then you look for those problems, either being fuel delivery or vacuum leak, or possibly a mechanical issue. Getting back to the leak down, actually a compression test would be a much quicker way to do it. A leak down would tell you definitively what's happening in that cylinder. So all of this is actually covered in an article I will post down in the description titled Performance Issues. Moving on. Assad Ahmed, hello Eric. I have a Honda Civic 2003 VTI Oriole 1.6 liter manual transmission in Pakistan. The problem I'm facing is that the car hesitates when in first and second gear while the RPM is between 1 and 2. Hesitation goes away in third gear and also in lower 2 gears. Problem goes away once the RPM crosses the 2 mark. My hesitation, I mean very light jerks, but the problem is amplified when the AC is on. I've replaced fuel injectors, fuel tank, fuel pump, as well as with OEM parts, but the problem is still there. Can you help, please? Car has 103,000 kilometers and it's in very good condition except for this problem. Thanks in advance. Okay, you addressed fuel, it sounds like, by replacing parts, but you didn't do anything to address spark. And in my experience, it's very, very rare that Hondas actually have a problem with fuel delivery, both with the fuel pump and the fuel injectors themselves. However, you're in Pakistan, and I don't know what the fuel quality is there and if that might be coming into play, say moisture or something in the gas. Not real sure. However, you didn't say anything about addressing spark. Hondas are very sensitive when it comes to spark. In fact, if you don't use the correct plugs, and usually it's listed on the underhood sticker, it's usually NGK or Denso plugs, or you do different things with the I believe that has a coil and plug setup, so you don't really have any wires or distributor to deal with, I don't believe, on that engine. So really, I'd be looking into those things as far as misfires. I often find misfires are caused by ignition problems, especially under load. And the fact that I believe you said in here somewhere that you don't have a check engine light on. If you do have a check engine light on, I'm reading over it really quick here. You didn't mention anything about a check engine light. If there is a check engine light on, look into that check engine light. That's the first place to look. That's your biggest clue as far as what's happening. So also look there for the issue, but don't forget about spark and don't forget about mechanical as well. So if there's a mechanical issue, that can also contribute to a misfire problem like what you're having. In particular, you might want to look into, given that you have a problem with the RPMs being what they are, just for the heck of it, check for a restricted exhaust. Find yourself a vacuum gauge and hook it up and run the engine at about 2,000 RPM while observing the needle on the vacuum gauge. If it starts to drop, with any amount of time, it shouldn't drop. It should drop a little bit when you run it at 2,000 RPM, but the needle should stay steady. What'll happen if you have a restricted exhaust is it will slowly come down. It will slowly fall. And if that happens, you have a restricted exhaust. Now, where that restriction is, it's hard to say. First primary suspect would probably be the catalytic converter. But first you need to determine whether or not you have that, and it's a simple test with vacuum gauge. Also, a video on that will be linked in the description for you to check out. Once again, check out that performance link. It goes through all the things I just described and more. Tom Newing, hi Eric, how's it going? See, I said automotive questions, and I started reading that one. I read that one earlier, and that may be something for that other show I mentioned with the AMA. Fahil Ismail, I hope I'm doing that correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. Hey, Eric, I have a 2001 Jeep Grand Cherokee 4.7. Hey, so do I. With 190,000 miles. I'm having two problems. One is that the rear axle seal changed out and with a new kit and it still leaks. How can I deal with that? Second, issues with an O2 sensor replaced with aftermarket one, and it lasted a few months before the code came back. Do you recommend using the original stuff? Thanks. Thanks for all your hard work. Personal note, P.S. Make a GoFundMe for the Jeep, and trust me, Jeep lovers will help you out with that. The more I think about that Jeep, the more I want to part it out. It's just a headache, but I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, because right now I'm focused on the Fairmont. Anyway, we've gotten off topic. Okay, the axle seal. I believe when you change those axle seals, you also have to change the bearing. In fact, I don't even think you can put a new axle seal on without changing the bearing back there. And that bearing has to be, I cut them off initially, and then it has to be pressed on. Now, if there was an issue with that bearing or the axle where the bearing rides on, where the bearing contacts the axle, and maybe that's worn or something like that. If you have a problem with the bearing and the wheel is not steady, it will tear up a new seal pretty quickly. Also, the installation of a seal. So installation is hugely important in checking for any play in that wheel. So check for play in that wheel. If you have play back there, then it could be a problem with that bearing. It could also be a problem with the axle itself, where the bearing makes contact with it. So that's where I would look as far as that's concerned. And the installation, if it's all gooped up with RTV and stuff like that, well, I mean, some RTV around the outside of an axle seal is acceptable, but I've seen installations, well, a little less than acceptable. As far as the O2 sensor, honestly, I can't help you with that. You didn't tell me what code you had. O2 sensor codes come in all different shapes and sizes, and they mean all kinds of different things, not necessarily that you have a bad sensor. For instance, if you get an O2 sensor lean code, it doesn't necessarily mean that the O2 sensor is bad. It means that it's detecting a vacuum leak. So a lot of people just go straight for the O2 sensors whenever they get a code that says O2 sensor, when really the O2 sensor could be telling you what the real problem is. So with that information, you can go further with that. Once again, consult that performance link that will be down in the description. Omar GS has a 2004 Chevy Silverado 1500, and it's hard to turn right but not left. Changed the power steering pump, but kind of made it worse. Saw a video that recommended using C-Phone's Trans-Tune to help clean the line. What do you think? That would work? What do you recommend? Everybody always hopes for the power steering pump in these instances, but about 99.7% of the time it's a power steering rack. And the seals internally inside of it are a problem. It's not a line that's clogged. I mean, you're talking about a lot of pressure going through those lines. If one of those lines was clogged, you would definitely know it. That being said, in my experience, it's almost always a power steering rack in these situations, and that's what I would look for. In fact, if you want to confirm it, pull the rack boots back and see if you see fluid coming out. If you do, well, you just found your problem, and I'd replace the rack. I wouldn't try to recondition it. They're just so much easier to deal with that way. Wes G. Eric, I hope you had a good Easter if you celebrated. If you don't, I hope you had a good regular weekend. I've watched a lot of your videos where you tear apart automatic transmissions, and you've said not changing the ATF for a long time, then changing it can cause problems with the newer, thinner fluid able to pass through worn seals, clutch discs, etc. To that end, I have a 2005 Hyundai Accent with just 100,000 miles, and the ATF has never been changed. Is there a way to tell if is there a way to tell if I'm at the point where changing the ATF would do more harm than good? Also, is there a general mileage interval when you should change ATF normally? That information is contained in the service manual for sure, and a lot of times also in the owner's manual. So sometimes it's specific to vehicles. Some vehicles, you're never supposed to change the transmission fluid. I know it's weird, but they're making non-serviceable transmissions now. So it really just sort of depends. So I always default by saying, check with that dang old manufacturer. They made it. That's their baby. They should know what they're doing. And automatic transmission fluid is sometimes very specific to vehicle as well. Not using the correct fluid can be just as damaging as not changing the fluid. I've written about this in the article that will be linked in the description as far as automatic transmission fluid in this exact issue. It's a crapshoot, honestly, and I really can't say whether it's going to work out for you or not because there's way too many variables that come into play here. But as a general rule, I don't know. I don't want to say a general rule because, like I said, especially with transmissions, manufacturers are all over the map as far as how they want them serviced or not serviced. In fact, they make them difficult to service in a lot of cases where either like Hondas, they don't have a filter that you can change, or like on GMs to where you have to have the engine running, you have to have it up in the air. In fact, that's more common than not. No dipstick on a transmission to even tell you what the fluid level is, and you have to go through a special procedure, and you have to have all four wheels up off the ground, and the vehicle has to be level, and it has to be running, and you have to and on and on and on. So automatic transmissions, as I said, all over the map. Check with the manufacturer to find out what is right for you. If you're past the interval, if you're well past the interval, all I can say is you're rolling the dice, and beyond that, I don't know. They definitely don't flush it though. I think that's what's really going to tip it over the edge. Some people say, I haven't changed it in a really long time. I'll flush the transmission fluid. Well, that, in my experience, is often the kiss of death. So I will throw that out there. Moving on. George Burkhard. Hi, Eric, love the show. Appreciate your time to answer questions. I have a 95 Accord. I've noticed that on the highway, on an incline or other time when I have an open throttle, I can smell exhaust in the cabin. Does this imply that I have an exhaust leak somewhere? I tried your method of plugging the tailpipe with a rag and can't find any leaks. I figure at 70 miles per hour, I shouldn't be getting any air from the tailpipe back in the cabin. Another quick question for you, if you have time. I keep having bubbles in my coolant after I remove them, all using a radiator funnel. I can't find any evidence of leaks in the coolant lines. Is it possible that I just have a huge bubble somewhere that's taking forever to come out? Or is it possible that I have a leak where air can get in, but fluid isn't coming out, and therefore it's hard to find? Thanks in advance. Okay, question 1, 95 Accord. First of all, I can't smell what you're smelling, but I'm wondering if it's not exhaust that you're smelling. I'm wondering if what you're smelling is actually fuel. I have known Hondas of that vintage to have problems with leaking fuel injectors, and if you have that, it's pretty easy to spot. It's usually very clean around that area. Look around the fuel injectors, and if it does appear to be leaking, something in the engine compartment. If you're smelling it in the passenger compartment, the most likely place that smell is originating is in the engine compartment. The vents for the HVAC are right underneath the windshield wipers, and as you're traveling down the road, the airflow is as such to where it would come into the cabin at that point. I'd be checking for fuel leaks, particularly around the fuel injectors, let's see, it's a 95. That one doesn't have the fuel filter that's super hard to get to, so check around the fuel filter as well. But that's what I'd be looking for. Maybe you're not smelling exhaust, maybe you're smelling fuel. Also, if I'm not mistaken, Accords of that vintage sometimes had cracked exhaust manifolds. You can take the cover, there's that metal shield on the outside of it, probably got rusty bolts, and it's quite possible they'll be breaking, or it's quite possible they're so rusty you won't be able to get to them. But if you can, remove that shield and have a look underneath there, or as you're doing the rag and the tailpipe thing, try to listen very closely around the area of the exhaust manifold. If that's where you hear the noise, or you can possibly smell exhaust, that's where I'd look. Now, as far as the air bubble, first of all, it's imperative that you follow the correct procedure. I mean, you talked about the funnel and everything. I'm going to assume that you have followed the correct procedure, but so many people do this incorrectly. And one of the things that's imperative is that you turn the heat all the way on, but you leave the fan off. If not, the coolant won't cycle through the heater core, and you'll just basically have an air bubble that will still be there. Also, there will be some bubbles in the cooling system. If you're having problems like intermittent heat, or your engine starts to idle funny, things like that, that could indicate air pocket in the system. But if you're just taking off the radiator cap and you're seeing a bunch of little bubbles, it's normal. Coolant gets hot, it starts to boil, especially when you take the radiator cap off. So in fact, the pressure on the radiator cap keeps it from boiling. As soon as you take it off, that pressure is gone. So liquid or fluid that wasn't boiling at that time, once exposed to the atmosphere, starts to boil. So you may be getting a false reading there because of the way you're checking it. As far as checking for coolant leaks, pressure testing is the way to go. I've got a video on this. Once again, linked in the description. Once again, all of this stuff in the article about engine overheats that will also be linked in the description that you can check out at any time at EricTheCarGuy.com. Moving on, Jake Austin has a 1987 Toyota pickup with 78,000 miles. It has a 22R carbureted engine. Fantastic truck, fantastic engine. Toyota did it right. Trust me. Recently, the truck has had a start-stall problem, but always running after a few tries. It also has a hesitation or flat spot in acceleration until the engine hits higher RPMs. And last week, the truck would start to misfire while traveling down the highway going up a hill. The truck would get slower and slower until I had to pull over. I watched all of your carburetor rebuild and adjustment videos, and I thought I should do a full rebuild and adjustment because the carb has never been rebuilt before. So far, I have not found any vacuum leaks or other tune-up items that need to be addressed, like spark plugs, timing, distributor cap, rotor, fuel filter, etc. The truck did pass Oregon emissions test last week. Any advice would be great. Thanks for all you do. Keep up the great work. Based on your description, it does sound like you're on the right track to where it could be a fuel delivery problem, especially when you're going uphill. When you're talking about a carbureted vehicle, it's not like fuel injection to where there's always pressure behind fuel injectors and you can pretty much turn the car upside down and it would theoretically still run. What you've got with a carburetor is you've got a float bowl, and that float bowl is supposed to maintain a certain level of fuel. In fact, it sounds like you may have watched my carburetor rebuild videos, and that's basically what maintains the reservoir, if you will, of fuel for the carburetor to use. And they calculate its size, you know, right down to the very nanometer or whatever. So there's a lot of engineering that went into carburetors. That being said, you say going up a hill, that sounds like it might be starving for fuel for something. Now, is it the carburetor? Well, given that you passed an emissions test, and I'm going to assume that the emissions for a 1987 are not going to be as stringent as a newer vehicle, so those tolerances could be rather loose. Maybe you were close to being out on something. I'm not really sure, but I'm just wondering, throwing this out there, about if the fuel pump's putting out like it should. If I'm not mistaken, that has I think that has a mechanical fuel pump. It's been a while since I've worked on one, but if it does have a mechanical fuel pump on the side of the engine, you might want to check to see if it's able to keep up with a sufficient volume. If not, there's a diaphragm on the inside. It's basically like it's like those old pump wells you see people using in old movies and things. And it runs off the camshaft, and if it's not able to pump a sufficient amount of fuel to the carburetor, then the carburetor won't be able to work properly. So in other words, if that bowl gets low, it won't be able to do what it needs to do. So you might check fuel filter first, and also check the fuel pump itself and see if that has something to do with it. That'd be where I'd be looking first. And I go on this, and as far as rebuilding that carburetor, those older Japanese carburetors are a bit tricky, and you kind of need some old timer to guide you through it, because there's not a lot of information out there on them, and people just aren't rebuilding carburetors anymore. That's one of the reasons why I did those videos. I love rebuilding carburetors. I've even rebuilt some of those carburetors that you mentioned, some of those old Honda carburetors, those Keenan carburetors and things I've been into, and man, you know, it gave me it gave me a run for my money, that's for sure. And then setup afterwards is also some, especially on those late 80s versions that had all the emissions and things going to them. There's like 100 vacuum lines and all that kind of stuff going to the carburetor, and you have to set each thing individually, and sometimes it requires special tools, and you stand on your head on the third day of the month, and you know, there's just weird procedures that you have to follow. So I would avoid rebuilding the carburetor. In fact, what most people do these days is they just buy another carburetor that's already been reconditioned, and that would likely cost more than that truck. But the truck might be worth saving. Another thing to watch out on that engine, just throwing this out there, is the timing chains get loose, and that can cause some other problems, some performance problems kind of things. And given that it's an 87, although it has low miles, I'd still check the timing chain, because that was the only thing about those engines. The timing chains would get loose or whatever, and sometimes they'd actually wear a hole in the back of the timing cover and cause the water to leak into the oil. So if it starts to rattle or something like that, in fact, I've done a video on checking timing chain slack, and you do have a distributor on there, so you could follow that. Linked in the description. Check that out too. Spent a lot of time on that because I like that truck. Gabrielle Garcia. Hey, Eric. First, I want to start off by saying, how's your day? And I have a question on how to upgrade my Honda Civic. Nope, I'm not doing that. That would be an AMA question. Mechanical questions, people, please. Oscar Johansson, maybe that's the correct way to say it. Apologies. I have a Honda Civic 99 with about 450,000 kilometers on it. It starts and runs fine until it gets to operating temperature. Then it just dies. So when I try to start it back up, it cranks but won't start. I'll wait for 15 to 30 minutes. It starts up again and runs fine, but the same thing when reaching operating temperature. It does not have any codes or check engine light on. Do you have a clue what it could be? Thanks for the great show. Greetings from Scandinavia. Scandinavia sounds cool. Okay, let's see. A 99. I'm just going to throw this out there, and sometimes they didn't throw codes for these. Coolant temperature sensor. But before you go there, check for air in the cooling system. Air in the cooling system can fool the coolant temperature sensor, and therefore it will make the mixture off. Also, if you have an aftermarket distributor on there, 99s were kind of famous for having distributor problems. Aftermarket distributors, in my experience on Hondas, just haven't worked out. I've said it over and over again. But they're cheap, easy to find. I get it, but I freaking hate them. Anyway, you don't have a check engine light, so there's not much you have to go on there. But once again, like I was saying before, I don't see too many problems with fuel delivery on Hondas. In fact, I rarely see fuel delivery problems. I usually see like spark problems that cause things like this. But given that it gets to operating temperature, temperature is the key here. And I have known temperature sensors on Hondas. Strangely enough, they call them TW sensor, temperature water. Don't know why. Maybe it's some Japanese translation. Anyhow, you might try that. Just maybe start by unplugging it. Unplug the coolant temperature sensor. The check engine light will come on at that point, but it will default to a state to where it ignores the reading. And if that's the case and it does run past operating temperature and you're able to drive around, put a coolant temperature sensor in it and see what happens. Once again, another question that is not mechanical related. Well, let's see. Here's one. Mohammed Mohsen. Hey, Eric, I drive a 1996 Mercedes-Benz S320 W140 type. The car has a problem with a low brake pedal on long travel. Pressing the brakes, nothing happens for the first half of the pedal travel, but then the brakes start grabbing and the car brakes normally. I first bought the car and found out the rear brake pads had seized in the caliper body, making the pistons to be stuck inside, so I had no brakes in the rear. I replaced the rear pads and got the brakes to work again. I've also bled the system a few times using a vacuum bleeder. The rotors are still within spec, closer to a new rotor thickness. The pads have plenty of material left, and there are no leaks whatsoever. Could this be a master cylinder problem? Sorry for making this long. Thank you in advance. No trouble at all. People have posted much longer, but I do appreciate your concern. Okay, brake pedal feel. First thing I'm going to is bleeding the system. Maybe your vacuum bleeder isn't up to the task. Vacuum bleeding actually is one of the better ways to do this, but what you're describing sounds a lot like air in the system, although a spongy pedal would also be along with that. Most of your pedal feel comes from the rear brakes. If your pads were stuck and they weren't moving correctly, it could mean that the calipers themselves were not moving. And if the calipers themselves were not moving, that could be the cause. Rear brakes have everything to do with how your brake pedal feels. So if your rear brakes are not in good order, your brake pedal feel is often off in my experience. So I'd be looking back there to make sure that those calipers are working. One way you might consider doing this is lift up the rear of the vehicle, have a buddy or something like that step on the brake pedal as you try to turn the rear wheels. I'm thinking that might be a rear wheel drive vehicle. Therefore, you want to do it while it's in neutral. The engine does not have to be running. All you need to do is have somebody depress the brake pedal while you turn the rear wheels. And if you're by yourself, you can find some way to jam the brake pedal down to where the brakes should be applied. If you're able to turn the rear wheels, well, you know your calipers aren't working. And if they aren't working, replace them, bleed the system out, check your brake pedal again and see where you're at. Once again, there will link in the description about brake diagnosis and brake problems. Let's see. I'm going to leave that question out for now. We're getting towards that half-hour point where I start just throwing things out there. Anyway, what Brian Burke wanted to know is, generally speaking, how long can his 2016 V6 automatic Accord perform over time? And generally, as long as you maintain it, it will perform as well, as close to new as possible for a good long time. Honda does make a darn good engine. So keep it maintained and keep it happy. And follow the maintenance schedule in the owner's manual for that, and that should keep you on the path. Sprint 316. Hey, Eric, thanks for reading. And if it's your birthday, happy birthday. I love the joke. It's right back at you. Drives a 1990 Cadillac Seville. I got it around 2 years ago, and I've done all the work myself, but I'm stuck. It's got power windows, and since the day I got it, 3 of them go up and down, but seem to lack speed and power. They're very slow, and I doubt it was from the factory like that. The 4th, which is the right rear, only comes down about 5 to 6 inches. They will only go up about an inch. I'll wait a few minutes, and it will go up another inch or so. Repeat this until it's up all the way. It's not usually a problem, but when passengers get in the car first thing and they do this unknowingly and roll down, and I'm stuck with the process of getting it back up. My question is this a problem with the motors? Maybe they're just old and tired, or is this something more difficult? I don't do electric work, so I'm clueless here. Haha. I do have a really good write-up on electrical stuff. Once again, linked in the description. But it sounds to me, you've got one that works. And this is actually kind of common in my experience, especially with luxury cars like this. A lot of times they're owned by older people, and older people tend to be creatures of habit in my experience. That being the case, one window gets used, the rest don't over a long period of time. Now, there could be a couple of things going on here. The first thing I would check for is the simplest thing. Keep it simple, stupid. Anytime you're diagnosing something, go for easy solutions. It could be because the windows weren't used a whole lot, that the window tracks themselves have gotten old and are causing a lot of resistance for that window to move. So those motors are working against a lot of resistance. And what you're describing sounds like there's circuit breakers inside those motors, so that if they reach a certain point or something like that, where it heats up the motor beyond its capacity to operate, there's a circuit breaker inside that cuts power to the motor and it stops working. Then after it cools down, it's able to work again. So it almost sounds like you're describing that. So what I would do is get myself some silicone paste. Yes, Eric the Car Guy loves his silicone paste. Get some, roll down those windows, get some silicone paste, put them down in the tracks and see, run them up and down a few times and see if that solves a problem. It could just be a simple problem of lack of lubrication. But that's what I would try first. Other than that, could be, well, I don't want to say it could be a ground issue because it's common to all those windows that aren't getting used. It seems like you've got one window that's working great, which, as it works great. But those other windows, if they didn't get used a lot, could have, the rubber could have swollen up. It could have, any number of things could have happened. But start with the simplest thing. See if you can get those things the best advantage they can as far as being able to move up and down. In my experience, silicone paste is awesome for this. A silicone spray, you're going to go, can I use that? Well, you can, and it'll work for maybe about 2 minutes. It doesn't have staying power. In my experience, you need to use the paste. So give that a try, and hopefully that'll work out for you. Andy Pittman. Hey, Eric, I'll keep it short. I'm back with my 2000 Tiburon with 150,000 miles, and the issue I've been having is after an hour, my car being warmed up while driving at 45 to 50 miles per hour, the RPMs will jump from 2,500 to 3,500 and do that a few times until it stays at 3,500. I have slow acceleration when I come to a complete stop, but once I turn my car off and restart it, it's fine for another 20, 30 minutes. I did get codes and got a P0734 and a P0733. The issue doesn't happen all the time, however. Any idea of what could be causing this? Well, Andy, I answered your question because I took the time to look it up, and the inevitable conclusion, 95, actually higher than that, % of the time, automatic transaxle replacement. So it sounds like you need a transmission. And based on your description, even after turning it off and things like that, it could just be cooling down and resetting, whatever. But according to everybody that had this code, and particularly the P0734, it was replacement of the automatic transmission. I'm sorry to give you the bad news. But yeah, transmissions can be like that. I know they're electronically controlled, blah, blah, blah. And, but when those electronic controls fail, they don't allow pressure to go where it's supposed to go. And when pressure doesn't go where it's supposed to go, the transmission slips. It causes a mechanical problem after the fact, and it's just cascading nightmare of yuck. So And aside from that, the likelihood of a DIY doing a successful automatic transmission repair is slim. So I apologize, but either take it to a professional or take it to a professional and resign yourself to the fact that you may very well be getting a transmission for that vehicle. My apologies. Let's see. Nate W. Tiddenbow. I hope I did that correctly. Is it normal for a battery to drain from 12.4 volts at shutdown to 11.6 volts after only 48 hours of sitting parked in the garage? Ambient temp around 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I had my original battery replaced last month with a new Duracell Ultra Gold manufactured in 2015. And I had the new installed battery and the alternator checked at 2 different places, both of which used fancy computer-based tester. Both passed fine. Nothing is left on as far as I can tell. Would an AGM battery be better, or does it need a special charging system? Now, AGM is absorbed glass mat technology. So it's this new fancy technology as far as batteries are concerned. You don't need to go there, man. First of all, 12.4 volts is slightly low for a battery with a good charge. Battery static charge, if it's good, is 12.6 volts. If it's dropping to 11.6 volts, you may have something called a parasitic draw, which means some circuit somewhere is remaining on and causing the battery to drain while the car is off. Since you've had these things tested at 2 different places, let's take those off the table as far as being the possible cause and look to a parasitic draw issue. Just so happens, got a video on it. In fact, it's one of my favorite videos. And what you do, in essence, is disconnect the positive battery cable and install an ammeter, which you're going to have to get. And it's usually a digital volt ohm meter. And see if you can find one usually they have 2 different fuse circuits. They have a 10 amp circuit, and then they have one that's lower. I always start with the higher amp circuit because you're not really sure what's going on. But the details of this and what to look for are all in that video. But basically what you're looking for is you're looking for something to draw on the battery after the thing is shut off. Now, depending upon the year of the vehicle, this may take some time. Some vehicles take 30 minutes or so to power down and run different checks and do different things that cause an amp draw. You have to wait for it to go. And then acceptable levels, somewhere around 50 milliamps. Actually, you'd like to see less than that if possible. But once again, depending upon what vehicle you have, but all that's covered as far as how to find it. You basically pull fuses until you see the amp draw drop off. And once you've done that, you found the circuit, but then you have to get a wiring diagram for that circuit and then track things down from there. So I've given you a rough sketch, but the video does a much better job of describing it. It's kind of complicated. Well, to some extent, but mostly you're going to need a wiring diagram and a DVOM to go there. All right. Yeah, you got another question. All right, real quick. Is it normal for there to be a door creaking like noise when you apply the brakes, even when parked or in neutral and not moving? Noise is coming from the rear, disc, not the front. Drums in the back, set up a 2007 Dodge Caliber SE 2-liter, approximately 45,000 miles. It had a pre-purchase inspection done at a local shop before I bought the car 4 months ago, and they said it has no issues and the car was in excellent shape and well taken care of. Brakes still work very well. No squeaks or other noises, stiff pedal. Oh, and by the way, if you've got an aftermarket stereo in that car, that would be my #1 suspect. So disconnect that and see if the problem goes away. And if there's a fuse specifically for that, try that, because installations of aftermarket stereos are kind of all over the place. As far as this noise in the back, I'm going to put a link in the description to my drum brake replacement video. There are little, for lack of a better word, bosses on the backing plate that the brake shoes are supposed to ride on. And it sounds to me like, 1, the brakes are probably out of adjustment, and 2, there's a lack of lubrication in this area. And if that's the case, you'll get exactly what you describe here. So look to that, and that drum brake video will show everything disassembled. It will show you where to lube those brake shoes and everything, and hopefully that will alleviate the noise. However, sometimes the wear is so great that the backing plate either has to be welded or replaced. So it really depends on, there will be a little S groove there. That's normal. But if you see like a hole through the backing plate, well, that's certainly a problem, but that's most likely what you're dealing with there. Heather Whitener, your videos have helped me so much. I'm getting ready to do, well, thank you for that. I'm getting ready to do a valve cover gasket replacement on a 97 Honda Odyssey due to oil leaks in the spark plugs. I see the torque specs you use for the Accord were 22 and 12 to bolt the top back on. Are those foot-pounds the same for the Odyssey? If not, how do I find out how tight they should be? Thanks so much. You've saved me thousands, Heather. Awesome. I always love hearing how my work helps people, honestly. It kind of gets me up in the morning. Anyway, that 97 Odyssey is honestly built on the same platform as the Accord, and it has the same F-Series engine in it. So everything follows suit to be the same thing. But just make it easier on yourself. Just replace the valve cover stuff first. Now, I will say this. I did make a mistake in the video as far as what I should set those at. I believe I put text in the video to show what the correct torque specs were supposed to be. And if not, it's in the description. So it was originally too high. But as far as valve cover bolts, if you just snug them down with a 1/4-inch ratchet, you should be fine. And I would start with just the valve cover stuff. If you continue to have a leak after that, then go further down and remove that cam cage, because I've gotten 1 or 2 emails from people who have attempted that fix. And one thing they did, this is the one mistake that a lot of people do, they pull the bolts out. And when they do, the springs cause everything to go everywhere. And if you notice in the video, I leave the bolts in for that very reason. So do not take the bolts out, take the whole assembly off. And please be extremely careful when you put it back on to make sure everything's lined up. Because if it's not, you'll kill the engine. In fact, a Vigor long ago suffered that problem because of a coworker who accidentally did that very thing. So if it's not done correctly, you know, it's a very, very bad day. So make it easy on yourself. Start with just the valve cover gasket and stuff. And, you know, honestly, between you and me, get the Honda gasket. I know it'll cost you a little bit more, but look for it of an online source, and you'll have a lot easier time with it. I've fought with those aftermarket gaskets in the past, and they're just a pain in the patoot. So no, go with a Honda gasket and the spark plug well seals, and that will be much easier. And if you replace that and you end up having to replace the lower seals, you don't have to do the valve cover. That's where I'd go with it. Okay, we are like well into the show, and maybe I talked a little too much with some of these, but it's random time. Let's just see. Somebody just posted a question. John McLaughlin. Hi, Eric. Love the show. I'm working on a 2001 Citroen Saxo. Yeah, go ahead and laugh now. Better sound, Eric. We're picking it all up. The car overheated and has blown the head gasket and has a warped aluminum head. I have sourced a working engine and transmission, even though my trans is good. I'm wondering if I should, hey, wait a second. I'm wondering if I should replace the head gasket, timing belt, do a full service before I put it in as preventative measure. Your thoughts and opinion will help a lot. Thanks again. Don't do a head gasket. If it's together and it's working fine, leave it. As far as timing belt and water pump, if it's a used engine, replace those, yes. I'm not familiar with that engine, so I really couldn't say what it has in there, but yes, that's what I would do. Timing belt and water pump service. Do not do a head gasket. That would just be a waste of time. Mostly those happen because things get run on coolant. So look for coolant leaks, make sure those are all good. You know, make sure your cooling system's all sealed up, working properly, and bled of air. Links in the description. Let's just see. I'll do a couple more of these random ones. We've gone on 45 minutes and time has just flown by for me. For those of you watching, I hope it has for you as well. Brett Ashworth has a 2005 Toyota Sienna with a 3.3 liter V6. Sometimes when I accelerate, the valves or maybe lifters rattle. It happens a couple of seconds after beginning to accelerate, then stop just after it shifts, and it begins again in a few seconds into the next gear and stops when the van is cruising at constant speed. What may be causing this? This is an intermittent issue. Thanks, Brett. Okay, 2007 3.3 V6. If I'm not mistaken, that has a timing belt on it. And I don't know if they went to automatic tensioners at that time or not, but I have known loose timing belts to cause valve train type rattle noises. So if you haven't had a timing belt service in a while, it might be worth looking into. It could have a tensioner problem that's going bad that's causing that. And if there's no associated check engine lights to go along with it, indicating misfires or something like that, I'm going to kind of take fuel delivery or misfire issues off the table just because you didn't mention that. And I'd be looking for a mechanical issue. And my first suspect would be the timing belt is where I'd go hunting there. And I'm just doing these random now, so please don't get mad if I miss your questions. Brett Fiddler, 99 Eclipse with a rough idle and running rich. Worse at idle, -15 long-term fuel trim. Stalls out at idle when the engine is warm occasionally. Fuel pressure is good. TPS reads 13% when closed. If cleaning the IAC doesn't work, possible TPS issue. Well, the minus 15 means it's taking fuel away. Maybe you've gotten, maybe you've got a leaking fuel injector or something like that. You said the fuel pressure is good. So yeah, that's, and 13% when it's closed. It seems to me that might be a little high as far as a percentage. I would be happier with it around 5%. So maybe your throttle cable is a little too tight and causing the throttle not to be able to close all the way. The way I check for this is while the engine is idling, I just sort of grab the throttle linkage and try to pull it closed more. And if it starts to idle better, that's usually a good indication. Or you can just disconnect the throttle cable altogether, and sometimes that will also help. Ooh, the lighting has changed. I got to get a better light for over there. That one kind of sucks. Anyhow, let's see. We'll do one more. Let's see. Ben Larson. Oh, am I going to have a meetup this year? Well, that's actually over on my website as far as the meetup is concerned. So just go to my website all the way on the right, click that link. Meetup stuff is there. I don't want to get involved into something that gets too deep. All right. Kevin McClutchin. Hey, Eric, I have a 2009 Honda Civic Si 6-speed manual with 77,000 miles on it. Fourth gear only makes a slight whine noise when I am lightly on the throttle, more pronounced at 3,000 to 4,000 RPM range. You can only hear it with the windows up, radio off, and maybe just being paranoid. The car shifts smoothly, no problem shifting. I tried changing the transmission fluid, Honda OEM. Well done. And the sound still remains. Should I be worried? Well, if it's only slight and you have to go through all that stuff, probably not. I mean, it could be a bearing starting to go, but honestly, it'll be a long time before it becomes like an issue. You'll hear it at that point. But you might be being a bit paranoid. But I know what that's like. I'm a car guy myself, and I don't know, I sweat these little things all the time, but I wouldn't sweat it too much. And you've done the right thing by changing the fluid. In fact, that's what I would have advised you to do anyway. So you're kind of there. Anyhow, we've gone on for almost an hour. So I am going to close this one down. Once again, there's tons of links in the description to videos and articles and all kinds of things that I talked about during the course of this on-air live show that are there to help you. So that's where you go. If I didn't get to your question, I apologize. There will be another show, like I said, 2 weeks from today. It's Wednesday, the 30th of March. I don't know math. Anyway, or at least I'm too tired to come up with an answer for you on that. But I will be posting on the day of, as far as when that comes out. Once again, if you're posting questions to YouTube, I cannot see those questions. However, if you want me to do an AMA, ask me anything for a future episode, possibly the next episode, give me your thoughts on that, and I'll let you weigh in, and we'll decide if we want to answer other questions besides automotive, just for one, because I usually like to do this because I get inundated with a lot of automotive questions, and it's nice to have a forum like this to where I can just talk it out rather than type it out. I mean, I'm getting carpal tunnel from typing. Anyway, if I don't see you, no, I'm just going to close this one out. I guess I'm a bit tired today. Anyway, I gave you all the information you need. Once again, sorry for butchering your names. Social network links are also below: Google+, Facebook, Twitter. Close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, stay dirty. And I want to thank you once again for watching. Well, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll thank you once again for watching. And I'll see you next time.